Hi everyone, it's Jerry here. So in this video I'm going to take you through our feedback process for your PGO1 assignment. Now I've just really enjoyed reading back through all of your essays actually. In particular, it's been absolutely lovely to see how you're putting some of these things from the course into practice. So for a lot of you, despite being very early career teachers, I'm seeing some fantastic moments in your practice, moments when you're genuinely really helping your students. And I think, that even at this point in the course, some of the efforts that you're putting in to your own development, to your learning, it's looking like they're really paying off. All right, and I kind of want to mirror that back even at this point. So what we're going to do in terms of feedback, as you know, we're doing dialogic feedback on the PG set. So that means, it's not feedback by monologue. You're not going to get your grade, some developmental comments, from us kind of up on high. We're going to start a conversation about it. So the process we're going to go through together over the next couple of weeks on the blog is firstly, in this video later on, I'm going to give you some general comments, themes, patterns that I've picked up having read all of your pieces, specifically in terms of best practice and certain things that I think might be areas of development for a lot of you. Now, secondly, your task on the blog is going to be to do a piece of self-assessment. So, uncomfortable as it sounds, you're going to need to reread your assignment submission, have a watch obviously of this video, and see for yourself where you think you sit. Following that's when I'm actually going to come back and give you my more specific feedback and notes. So at this point, I do have about a side of A4 for everyone in terms of my scribblings. So I tend to do medal and mission feedback for each learning outcome separately, and I'm basically going to give that back to you in conversation. So based on the comments and the things that you've said that you're going to work on in your self-assessment, I'll then come back to that and we will, we'll compare our perspectives on the work. I will give you a grade at that point, and I will tell you why I think you've got the mark that you've got. And it's from there that we're going to carry on in this supportive process to improve your writing. Now, all of this is quite a lot of work, as you'll be picking up, right? Certainly much more work on your side to get to grips and to really understand where your assignment is and what you can do to improve it. It can be quite an exposing process, or it can feel a little bit icky looking back over work that you submitted and put in. Now, if you get resilient to that and if you lean into some of that kind of discomfort, honestly, this can be one of the most powerful, formative, developmental experiences that you'll ever get on essay writing. So while it's a bit of effort, if you persevere, I promise you, if you get on board with developing your writing now, I know it's quite a while away until your PGO2 and O3 submissions, but we put the work in now, and I promise you, you'll both do better in those assignments. And more than likely, I think you'll probably come to enjoy that writing process in the summer a little bit more as well. So during your self-assessment, this is going to be your task on the blog. Really, I'm just asking you two questions. So firstly, having reread your piece, having watched some of the general feedback to the group, what do you think you most need to work on to improve your essay writing? Focusing, I think, on some specific areas, certainly no more than 3 things to work on. Really, how could your assessed work be better? And at this point, you've got a little optional step. I know as a group we're quite well met and collegial, so you might want to take the opportunity to trade essays with someone else in the group, go through this same, not self-assessment, but peer assessment process, and see if their perspective about your kind of most important, most vital developments is the same as yours, and why, and if not, why. So once you've found your kind of most important areas for development, how are you actually going to do that? How are you going to achieve these goals? Where or how might you practice some of these academic skills? And throughout the year, how are you going to be getting feedback on that? Is that going to be some kind of peer work that you're doing with each other? Is there a critical friend that you've got on the course you're going to bounce ideas from? Are you after, more regular one-to-one tutorials with us? How are you actually going to operationalize some of that feedback for yourself? Cool. So having read through everyone's pieces and generated my specific feedback for people, I've found three key things really that have kind of cropped up as common trends. So firstly, there's the quite difficult skill of how to speak directly to the key verbs within each assignment brief. Secondly, there's the theme of using reading, research, teaching theory skillfully. And thirdly, there's the skill of thinking critically, of articulating a transparent thought process based on clear evidence and logic, really. So firstly, we're going to look at the verb in the brief. Now, this is one of the more, I suppose, hidden skills. There's a big concept called the hidden curriculum that comes up a lot, which is all of the skills and requirements that it takes to be successful in any given field or course, in our case. But skills that aren't quite transparent to people. So for example, the the skill of being able to look at an assignment brief and work out what it means, and work out what actually it's asking of you, and how you can craft something very specifically to meet what it's asking from you. That's actually a skill that not many people teach. I know that on the PG Cert we've done quite a bit of work trying to unpack that and trying to see it in practice. But still, I'm seeing that skill of writing specifically to the verb. That's kind of gone a couple of different ways for most people. So I know you're dying to see this slide again. Looking at the assignment brief, we've talked a lot about the outcomes. Really, it's the main essay section that I've seen this be the most troublesome for people. So generally in your value statements, particularly in the CPDs, people are writing to the brief just fine. In fact, actually, most people's CPD plans have been, at least to a decent enough level, and generally to a very high level. And I'll come on to that in people's specific feedback. Now, mainly if we talk about the main essay, you've obviously got this big and daunting word about critical evaluation, which really is just making a value judgment about how good something is, to evaluate its worth, and specifically evaluating your performance as a teacher. Yep, that's in one of the outcomes, but if we look at the assessment brief, critically evaluating, so forming a value judgment based on deep, thoughtful consideration of different perspectives. But it's evaluating how you've used what you've learned during the module to both inform and improve your professional practice. Now, typically where people have fallen down or not quite hit the whole thing is where they've done either inform or improve. So either people are talking in a very well informed sense, they're drawing from lots of theories, they've got a sense that they kind of know their students, know their practice, but they don't show how they're getting better, or make comments about what they've learned from a situation or what they would do differently in the future. Or for some people, it's all about how they've developed where they've got to, but not quite backing it up, or not quite taking an informed or rigorous enough approach to justifying that. And then I suppose I'd also point out in the values section, this is a little bit of a lighter piece, as we've talked about, but it is still analytical, self-reflective account. So you're not just having values or describing your values, you're digging deep into what they are, what they mean to you, how the values interact with each other, or interact with, say, the wider expectations of other teachers, in terms of their valued practice, or the expectations of your students. So, for me, this is the kind of key word of discussion, right? To critically discuss. You can't have a discussion with one point of view. So, one of the ways in which some of these assignments were a bit weaker was that they tended to be one-sided. So we're looking for a conversation within the piece, having different perspectives, looking at some of the challenges or the grey areas, where values cross over, or where it's quite conflicting or difficult to put these values into practice. That's kind of the heart of what we're aiming at in that particular piece. Lovely. So reading and research, the lovely and fun bit of postgraduate study. On the whole, I'd say people's use of reading and research tended to be pretty strong. I saw people referencing clearly having dug deeper, far beyond the reading list, which is fantastic in those cases. And certainly people were very aware of the need to back up and to justify their ideas with theoretical research. That's brilliant. And I think, using reading in a well-informed way, it's quite a difficult skill. We're not asking you to just, show us that you know a load of theories. That's great. That's a bit level 6 and not level 7. We're asking you to really utilize and link these ideas that other people are having to your practice very directly. So, when you were using reading, those of you that were most successful with this skill, you were using these ideas in very specific ways, linking them to your own practice. So, it might have been Hattie says this particular thing about feedback. Okay, brilliant. Well, that means, this to me as a result, and this is how I'm now using it in my practice. Some of the less successful essays, really that was kind of a bit overly general, a bit kind of Hattie says, then leaving it, for example, or making sweeping statements or conclusions. So, when using some of these ideas, I saw, potentially there'd be a quote that cropped up that's certainly of the same topic. Maybe you're talking about learning outcomes. Okay, your point about learning outcomes. Bloom says ... End of the paragraph, and that's not quite enough, because in those cases you're implying a link. It's like, the reading and the theory is connected, but unless you're really articulating that connection to us, and unless you're using the quote to get somewhere meaningful, really that's just a lost opportunity. So you want to tidy all of that up as much as possible. And certainly in this kind of idea about sweeping statements, conclusions, really at master's level, we're not kind of claiming to know everything, or referencing back, say, for example, the next part. If you're referencing someone like Hattie, you really need to be very specific about where these ideas are coming from. So it's both about being kind of sweeping and overly general in the statement that you're claiming lots from your perspective, but also, you need Hattie to have a page number, a date, because a lot of these authors' ideas change a lot over time. So you need to really nail down the point that you're making, and also, where these ideas are coming from that you're drawing upon. I know it seems like a little bit of kind of nitpicking, but really that referencing does a very important function. Later on in the course, we're going to come back to, for example, an author called Jerome Bruner, who's been around forever within education, and his thinking has developed tremendously over his career. And some of the ideas in his later work are quite drastically different to some of the things he was saying earlier on. So that just kind of hammers down the need to be clear about where these ideas are really being derived from. So feeding forward, some ideas for taking this skill of using reading and improving it. I'd say that the majority of you are using reading particularly effectively to inform your planning. So by that I mean, the decisions that you're taking in the classroom, the changes you're making to your practice, they're tending to be very well grounded, generally based on theory, or directly applying theory, and that's fantastic at this point. I'd say one area that you could develop and get some new insight with is not just using reading to inform what you do, but using reading to inform how you think about your practice. So, potentially thinking about an activity that you use that might be based on theory, but, having tried it out in class, and that works or that doesn't work, or maybe it's mixed, maybe there's a bit of a charge in the room. Well, there'll be lots of theoretical frameworks out there that could be used as a lens for you to try and understand why your students are reacting in that particular way. And I think that's something we'll work on as we go throughout the PG Cert. Certainly more of those explanatory theories can actually be in some cases more useful and supportive than the more technical things. And then finally, the idea of thinking critically within this piece. In particular, I think there are a couple of ideas or a couple of examples of thinking critically that are based around you using very clear evidence, sort of case study evidence from your practice, and taking on multiple perspectives. So, critical thinking can take lots of different forms, right? It just means kind of thinking deeply or taking on different perspectives or challenging ideas. And when thinking about critical thinking, you could think critically about everything and get nowhere. So it's about looking throughout your piece and finding those the kind of juiciest opportunities to really dig down, explore not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it, and if there are any other perspectives, alternatives that would be useful to explore, right? So those of you that were kind of most successful with this skill, you tended to have a very clear rationale at all times for why you were doing things, why you chose to take on a particular model, why you thought, there was a particular issue in your teaching that needed addressing in the first place, or, if it was a success in the room, why did you think that was a success in the room? So, those successful pieces were very good at showing us how you're thinking about your teaching, how you're thinking about your development, what's going on inside the room. Those that were the less successful, they were a bit more narrative and a bit descriptive. It was just the kind of this happened, I chose to do this, then this happened. Yes, that might have been a bit good. This is what I'll do next, on to the next thing. So as I said, it's about identifying the points that you can unpack your own reasoning and get what's probably very well formed, well justified in your head, out onto paper so that the reader can really see all of the decisions that you're making professionally to a very high level. And I say the biggest difference between those two pieces really was how this element of why and a deep analysis and everything, how that helped you to effectively evaluate your practice. Again, tying back to the key verb in the outcome, critically evaluate how you've used what you've learned. Well, if you're talking about something worked or my use of feedback was great, if that's going to be a deep evaluation, if that's a critical evaluation, that's got to be based on quite a lot of previous thinking and analysis of drawing in lots of different perspectives, right? So to help you achieve some of that, because this idea of critical thinking is a skill throughout the whole course, I think overall, as you're thinking about your practice, I'm seeing that as a group, you're currently very strong on reflection for action. And by that, I mean reflecting on what's an issue, reflecting on the issue, reflecting on what you could do about it. And you're probably stronger at that rather than reflecting on the action that you've already done and really unpicking and evaluating what's happened, and also reflection in action. So those of you that were using clear case studies in your practice, those of you that did it well, it was because you were reflecting in the moment and because you showed us some of those thought processes, some of those feelings that were leading you to make the decisions that you did. And then, as well as leaning into those two areas, one really powerful technique for kind of upping the amount of critical thinking in a piece, and really for challenging yourself and your own perspectives, is to make sure that when you're talking about particular things, particular decisions, for example, planning what you might do with a particular class, or evaluating what worked and what didn't within that class, or analysing and working out why things transpired in the way that they did. Really challenging yourself, and at each one of those moments, don't just go with your gut instinct and think, okay, well, that this is something I've learned before, this seemed interesting, but challenge yourself and try and come up with your two very best hypotheses. So, your two best plans of action, or your two best theories for, what was working and what didn't, or, your two best explanations for why, a particular intervention went the way that it did, or a student reacted in a particular way. And, given those two choices, as to the reader, discuss, explore them. Tell us which one you find more convincing and why that is. And I think if you can do that and challenge yourself to take a step back and to consider some other perspectives, that's really it's a very powerful way of writing. And you can use theory, you can use other feedback to start forming those perspectives. That's great academically, but more than that, as a practitioner and as a developing teacher, this is one of the most vital and important things that you can do to get out of your own head and to start challenging your initial assumptions within your practice. And if you can get that skill down, and there's a way of kind of doing that quicker and intuitively and with a bit of curiousness, I find that actually is probably the single biggest, it has one of the single biggest impacts on people's early development as teachers, because it helps you make decisions and choices about your development just to a much, much deeper level. Cool. So there's been a load of feedback there for you to think about. As I said, I've given you the lowdown on some of the stronger hallmarks, some of the less strong hallmarks of these pieces. Really what you need to do now is have a think about that feedback and then go reread your original essay, have a look at the learning outcomes, and I want you to pick 2, 3, maybe just one areas for you to improve on. And again, if we're thinking about forming a couple of hypotheses here, What do you think is going to have the biggest impact to your success in terms of written assignments on the PG Cert? Why do you think that is, right? And then number two, what are you going to do to work on this? How might you go about achieving it? Where can you get feedback to develop, right? So that's your blog task for the week. I'm really going to enjoy reading what you guys come up with. And again, it might feel a bit daunting, but exposing, but lean into it, enjoy the process, and I'll be here for the other side of the conversation when you've done that. Cool. Look forward to it, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.